certain that everything is certainly fine. Morning in Ponyville shimmers, morning in Ponyville shines, and I know for absolute certain that everything will die.
Blonde, spooky, bone stealer, don't you dare pursue, and curse you down to Tartarus for what you tried to do. Hello again, my viewers and subscribers. I am TorridPasta999, your online horror host, whom you go to find out what lives and what gets sent straight to hell. Welcome to part 2 of this Nightmare Night special double feature presentation. In part 1, we examined the creepypasta series Abandoned by Disney by author Slime Beast, and in this installment, we will now examine a fan film from the YouTube channel Fortress Films. Team Fortress 2 is an online team shooter video game released by Valve Studios in 2007, and despite effectively being abandoned by Valve for years, the game has since become so incredibly popular that it is effectively being held together by the sheer force of will of its devoted and enthusiastic fans, who have used tools like Source Filmmaker software to not only create their own assets, but even their own TF2 animations, which now make up roughly a fifth of internet videos. I mean, I think they do. It sounds right, so I'm going with it. So there. And with the multitude of video content, many have gone above and beyond to create impressive Team Fortress shorts and even films themselves. And the one such gem among gems is tonight's subject, Emesis Blue. Released just this year, the film is a much darker interpretation of the Team Fortress 2 brand, as it follows three of the mercenaries from the Blue Team, the medic, the soldier, and the spy, as they venture to the Conacher Slaughterhouse in their quest to uncover answers. And what they find there, what they will learn about the respawn machine, will irreparably break all of them. In the wake of the Gravel Wars, and fittingly taking place just days before Halloween, the scout is worse for wear, unable to work due to injuries, and is thus dropped by the Builders League United without compensation. And his friend and doctor, the medic, seems to also be worse off, though in different ways. The medic is having bizarre nightmares and moments of psychosis, and when he discovers that Scout's mother has been murdered and the Scout himself is missing, the medic ends up heading to the Conacher Slaughterhouse to try and rescue him from his kidnappers. Meanwhile, the soldier and the spy, now working as private investigators, are pursuing a fellow mercenary, the Heavy, as they investigate the disappearance of New Mexico Governor Jules Archibald, one of Blue Team's directors. The Heavy ends up shot dead, but the investigation is thrown off when an unknown figure in a plague doctor's outfit steals the briefcase the Heavy had on him. After learning of the murder of Scout's mother, the two follow a lead to the slaughterhouse, suspecting the medic of being the murderer. After both plots find their way to the slaughterhouse, things quickly go downhill, spiraling into a nightmarish gallery of strange and horrifying situations that both parties must fight their way through. Horrible, twisted perversions of their fellow mercenaries, zombies, war hallucinations, some of their fellow mercenaries coming back in monstrous ways, and even time travel seems to come into play at multiple points throughout the film. The medic manages to find Scout, held captive by the brothers of the engineer, only for Scout to believe that the medic had in fact killed his mother when it was part of his kidnapping. Although Medic tries fighting the Conacher brothers, he is unable to save his friend. As the soldier and spy get separated, soldier ends up encountering the Red Demoman, missing an arm and locked in a cage, and the two join forces against a horde of zombies before they inevitably become separated. But when he finally gets back, he sadly finds the Demoman didn't make it, frozen to death in a cold room, with a grenade in his remaining hand. The soldier ending up in a horrific underground cavern filled with countless dead copies of himself and his fellow mercenaries from both the red and blue teams. He manages to escape through some unintended time shifting. As the film goes on, more secrets than just the horrifically reanimated dead and the reality-bending incidents are discovered. It's learned that the respawn machine, a device used to revive fallen mercs during the Gravel Wars, has not only been seemingly malfunctioning, and that these malfunctions have been covered up, but it's also learned that the machine is connected to something far greater than just mad science. Even more than that, it's discovered that Jules Archibald was effectively playing both sides of the Gravel Wars for personal profit, bypassing the many faults and errors of the process at the full expense of the mercs, even selling the organs of fallen mercs on the black market. And that this spy was Archibald's right-hand man, killing anyone who stepped out of line. The medic tries to use the respawn machine, likely to try and revive the scout, but it doesn't seem to work. Meanwhile, after becoming separated from the soldier, the spy ends up held captive by Pyro, who really seems to have it in for the spy. His face, though practically never seen, is burned to the point of not even looking human. The spy manages to escape, but an error in judgment causes him to catch fire, barely able to keep himself from burning to death. He ultimately does find Archibald, who had been hiding out at the Slaughterhouse to evade the authorities for his crimes. But at this point, the spy's mind has been broken, the stresses of recent events and the trauma of his burning amplifying his feelings of bitterness over seemingly being left out to dry by his employers, despite all the unethical lengths he went to under their orders. And the spy kills Archibald. The now three plots finally converge as the insane spy encounters the soldier and the medic and forces them to play Russian Roulette. The medic seemingly shoots himself dead with the gun, but soldier manages to escape. At the funeral for Jules Archibald, the soldier is given a script to recite, accusing the medic of being an insane killer and the murderer of Archibald, but is instead driven to laughter over the cruel absurdity of it all. The spy takes this speech, revealing his true colors by accusing the medic, while also announcing that he will be taking over the late Archibald's position. But his deranged plot is quickly cut short when the medic suddenly emerges from Archibald's coffin, shooting the spy dead and then going on a brief shooting spree before stealing an ambulance. The soldier and medic have one last brief encounter before the shell-shocked and disillusioned soldier allows the insane medic to get away. As the medic drives off, he has one last psychosis episode, appearing in a bar out in the middle of nowhere, seemingly owned by the late engineer, with other dead characters. Unable to make any sense of this, he goes into the bar's restroom and pulls out a bottle of Valium, but when he peels off the label, he finds that he, and likely the other mercs as well, have been taking a drug called Emesis diazepam. The film finally ends with the medic dead at the wheel of the ambulance, having crashed into a telephone pole during his hallucination. The last shots we see are of the mysterious briefcase, now opened and glowing red. Then the grim image of the dead mercs flowing through blood veins, and finally the respawn machine on fire, as a vague silhouette can be seen through the fire. Emesis Blue is primarily a psychological horror thriller, and as such many questions either go unanswered or are buried deep within small clues littered throughout, and thus quite a lot is left open to interpretation. As a Team Fortress 2 story, it follows the general scope of the game's characters and lore pretty well. An interesting choice for the story is the decision to focus on the blue team, as the red team are the ones who primarily get the focus. Then again, seeing as how the blue team in the official animations are often used as mere fodder and foils for the red team, it makes sense in a way that the blues get more focus in a much darker and grim story. Almost as though the film shares a peek behind the chummy, comedic, and fun image the official material shows us, showing us instead the darker, more dour side of Team Fortress 2. Curious additions are also made to the established canon, like the soldier experiencing a World War II flashback, despite the soldier never actually fighting in World War II, according to his official bio. However, we can also assume that since this is the blue soldier, not the red, he may very likely have a different backstory. Of course, we can also just as easily assume that this is a false memory, created by the influence of the Slaughterhouse and the respawn machine. Alternatively, there is the interpretation that the respawn machine effectively creates clones of the mercs, a very popular theory and fodder for fanfictions among TF2 fans. which not only explains how both teams can have nearly identical mercenaries fighting each other over and over again, but also explaining character incongruities, like the aforementioned soldier's background, the blue spy being so villainous, the red Demoman showing up and then later dying, and the blue engineer, Del Conagar, apparently having two brothers that look identical to him, Zed and Maynard, when prior, the only family of his that was ever actually confirmed was his father and great-grandfather. Of course, this is ultimately a fan film and not an official piece from Valve Studios, so it is ultimately allowed to make whatever changes to the canon it likes. But I personally find it better for the overall experience if it slides in much nicer alongside official material. Still, one has to wonder, if the Blue Scout's mother is dead, then what will the Red Spy think of this? One last factor to consider is the administrator. In the game's tie-in comics, she is not only the announcer for the team matches as heard in the game, but also the true mastermind manipulating the Mann brothers against each other, along with her assistant, Miss Pauling, who does a lot of her dirty work. The fan film, meanwhile, has the civilian Jules Archibald as the apparent mastermind manipulating both sides of the gravel wars for personal gain. However, it isn't impossible that there are more people at play that we just don't see, or even that the administrator is manipulating Archibald, and that he's effectively her fall guy should things go south. We do briefly see Archibald in communication with someone called Goldman, and given the crowd at his funeral and the other officials who tried to compel Soldier to lie and frame the medic for murder, it's more than likely there could be other powerful players who go unnamed or even unseen. And that definitely includes the administrator. But for those who don't really care about the F2 or its game lore and are just looking for a spooky flick, how well does this hold up? While I haven't always been the biggest fan of the more psychological type of horror, I am quite pleased to say the movie is rather excellent just as a horror experience alone, with the entire film having an almost dreamlike quality to it. From the animation to the sound design to framing, choreography, and basically everything else. When the distorted, monstrous mercenaries appear, it doesn't feel random so much as it does like the nightmares we sometimes have, where reality as we remember it becomes horrifically distorted, and everyone we know wants us dead. Even the blatantly obvious references to other works of horror don't distract from the experience, seeming almost like a part of the twisted nightmare everyone is experiencing, while also serving as subtext for what's happening, like the reference to The Shining's blood-filled elevator and the respawn machine erupting in a wave of blood, symbolizing the blood shed countless times by the mercenaries, or the phrase taken from Stephen King's short story The Jaunt, used to imply the kind of horrific madness the mercs are put through when going through the respawn machine. The slower scenes that take place in the real world still have a dreamlike air to them that allows them to become nightmares, quickly and naturally, perfectly capturing that feeling we often have when we are alone at night, and we occasionally become paranoid that something may be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to drag us back into the shadows with it. Well, the dreamlike experience is good and all, but what is the film actually about? What's really going on at the Conacher Slaughterhouse, and what's really happening with the respawn machine? Obviously, I am not the first to cover and analyze this film, and certainly not the first to speculate elaborate theories about what's really going on. There are plenty of videos going in depth into the details, references, and interpretations, and I certainly recommend you watch them. But for a general explanation, what's already known is that both the Builders League United and the Reliable Excavation Demolition Companies were played against each other by a third-party contributor, in this case, the Jules Archibald Foundation, that the respawn machine doesn't work nearly as well as the companies insist, and that far too many ethical lines were crossed to initiate the gravel wars, also that Archibald, and very likely others, could profit from the pointless conflict. We also know one of the mercs, the blue team's spy, ended up working for Archibald, killing any dissenters to keep Archibald's secrets safe. And not only is there far more to the respawn machine than initially believed, as twisted copies of the mercs keeps appearing, but reality itself seems to be warping as the medic and soldier appear at different points in time, seeing previous events from different points of view. What we also learn is that the medic's hallucinations may not in fact be just psychotic episodes, but in fact a second personality, manifesting as the plague doctor that turns him into a murdering psychopath. As strongly hinted by his hallucinations and time traveling putting him at the scene of their first murder as it happens, as well as the use of the Fritz Lang thriller M, a German film about a child murderer, first seen at Scout's home, playing the scene where the murderer meets his first victim, paralleling Scout's imminent kidnapping and mother's murder. And later seen again when the medic, himself a German man, enters the home, while the scene of the killer being confronted plays in the background, as though to say that the medic is in fact the true killer. All of this culminates in the orchestrators of the Gravel Wars meeting their ends at the hands of their creations, and the implication that the respawn machine is still active, rebirthing a mercenary back into the world, twisted and horrific. That's the general synopsis as I understand it, but there is a reason I'm specifically covering this movie just after I previously went over the Abandoned by Disney creepypasta series, as I believe this movie accomplishes exactly what the Abandoned by Disney series tried to do, but ultimately didn't succeed in. In many ways, these two fanfictions have a lot in common. Both are about people uncovering corrupt companies that secretly engage in horrific and even supernatural practices to bolster their business, entirely at the expense of their workers. Both companies, the Walt Disney Corporation and the Jules Archibald Foundation, in pursuit of their goals, end up creating monsters that are seemingly beyond their control. And by the end of both stories, we're left to wonder what happens next, as our protagonists are either dead or dead men walking, and the monsters these companies unleashed are still active, and who knows what they will do next. But where Emesis Blue excels is on its focus. Abandoned by Disney's sequels seem to strongly suggest the author, or at least the unnamed protagonist if you prefer, had a lot more of a bone to pick with Disney and its unethical practices, focusing far more on how scummy and outright evil Disney is in its stories, rather than paying more attention to the impact these practices and the monsters they created will have on the wider world. Emesis Blue, by contrast, puts far more emphasis on the journeys of its protagonists and how the Archibald Foundation has not only ruined their lives, but destroyed their psyches and gradually transformed them into inhuman spawns of chaos and darkness. Exposition is another factor that separates the two, as the protagonist of the creepypasta ends up serving as an almost omniscient narrator, even at times speaking with knowledge you can barely believe he has, and speculating conclusions the author wants to reach without a very clear line of thought as to how the protagonist even got there. But Emesis Blue, as previously stated, directly explains very little, allowing the viewer to slowly become more immersed in the horror, rather than just relying on ideas alone to scare the viewer. In my coverage of the creepypastas, I also criticized the idea presented within them that, by exposing the company's foul play, it might somehow bring the House of Mouse down, and that this will end the monsters. My reasoning being that it comes across as a rather narrow-minded mindset, and even undercuts the horror of the stories by having very little lasting impact on the world that the stories take place in. By contrast, the killing of the Mann brothers and Jules Archibald does not in fact end the nightmare, but merely removes any sense of control one might have had over it, suggesting there is now nothing to restrain the monsters. And this brings me to another aspect about the film that I quite love. Going back again to my coverage of the creepypastas, I stated my initial interpretation was that Mowgli's palace had unintentionally been constructed atop the gateway to hell itself, and that all the evil and decay the protagonist witnessed was caused by the raw power of hell leaking through the foundations and infecting the resort. While Emesis Blue does not ever confirm that the glowing red cavern of dead bodies beneath the slaughterhouse is actually hell, rather there is the suggestion that the place is just where all the dead bodies are dumped, explaining why someone is down there driving a dump truck and moving the unending corpses, it does still line up almost perfectly with my preferred interpretation. That hell is not merely fire and brimstone to serve as eternal torture, but it is the manifestation of pure suffering and punishment, an unending nightmare that one cannot ever truly escape from, where reality vanishes, innocence is destroyed, and the mind snaps under the pressure. a constant misery without an end. As the unnamed mercenary puts it at the very start of Emesis Blue, while the crimes of most of the mercs remains unknown, the suffering they experience is undeniable. This is entirely my interpretation, but what I think happened is that, somehow, the respawn machine is connected to hell itself, and it works by recalling the condemned souls of the mercenaries, dragging them back through the unending torment, and rebirthing them back to the land of the living. The malfunctions of the machine start where hell's influence becomes too great to shed, and its influence starts bleeding out into our reality. This interpretation, I believe, is strongly supported through one of the most compelling theories I've heard about the movie, that rather than having a split personality, as the film initially suggests, the medic is in fact being possessed by the 10th class, an unnamed mercenary seen sparsely throughout the film, but is also the first character we see in the movie, appearing in video logs for testing the respawn machine, and later referenced in a phone call by Archibald, apparently having shot himself, reducing the number of viable respawn candidates from 10 to 9. The medic even tells Scout early on that sometimes the respawn don't always come back, or at least not for a while. To me, this means it's entirely possible that the 10th class respawned despite his suicide, but became merged with the medic in the process, causing the doctor to black out as the second soul took control over his body. And now, driven beyond madness by the torment he experienced again and again, the 10th class is out for vengeance, bringing together fellow broken mercenaries to destroy those that did this to them. But then, if this is truly the case, then what happens afterward? What happens when the companies are ruined and their owners dead? What now that revenge is achieved, but the hellish machine still functions? What will the dead do when they are brought back yet again, more twisted, monstrous, and bloodthirsty than before, and there is no one left who wronged them? To me, there is just something so much more palpable and frightening in the idea that such a mighty entity like a corrupt corporation just pales in comparison to the true breadth of evil and death it discovers. That we may think we know what true evil really is, that we have seen it in our world today, only to discover we cannot even comprehend the true evil of what lies beyond. Whether you are a Team Fortress 2 fan or just a casual viewer looking for a good scary movie, Emesis Blue is a fantastic film, both to experience as a psychological horror and as a twisted puzzle to solve on subsequent rewatches. I may have said a lot about it in this video, but there's so much more that went unsaid, and so much more to uncover on your own, and I insist you do just that. But for now, we come to the end of this year's special Torrid Pasta Nightmare Night double feature, and I hope you have enjoyed it. This is Torrid Pasta 999, signing out and reminding you, you think you know true evil? Broaden your scope and look beyond what you think you know, for what you will truly find goes farther than you think. Happy Nightmare Night!
Muffins!
Whew. Well, that was fun. Now on to the laborious process of editing the audio and putting together 2 videos. And hopefully getting us out over Halloween. Yay! I've talked more recording this audio than I have ever talked all year. Holy cow. Holy cow, I feel tired just talking.